Welcome to this episode of Inside Legal ESG. My name is Pamela Cohn. I serve as the CEO of Amity Advisory and also as the host of Inside Legal ESG. We are incredibly fortunate to have with us today Vidhya Prabhakaran, a partner at Davis Wright Tremaine. And in the interest of full disclosure, I have to admit that I very happily spent a decade of my career at Davis Wright during the 90s. And frankly, it still is one of the highlights of my career. They're very near and dear to my heart. Welcome, Vid. We're so excited to have you with us today.
Thanks so much for having me, Pam. And it's nice to hear your lovely words about Davis Wright.
I still feel that way, and that says a lot, doesn't it?
It really does. It really does.
So I would love for you to tell me about your practice at Davis Wright and your client work. And obviously, we're going to get to a deeper dive on the ESG component of it. But start by giving us a description of your practice.
Sure. So I serve as one of the co-chairs of the Energy Practice Group here at Davis Wright. And I'm one of the attorneys heading up our efforts to create what we're sort of labeling as a cross-disciplinary team focused on serving clients' needs pertaining to ESG issues. My personal practice is to help my clients navigate the regulatory complexities that exist in California. This is primarily in the energy arena, but I also support clients in the transportation, telecom, and water industries as well. What I like to say is that I represent the dirtiest of the dirty to the cleanest of the clean, as they all try to figure out how to make a buck in the new green economy in California.
And I suspect, just given that range of client industries that you work with, you're seeing a lot of the impact of ESG on them and their industries and how it's influencing your client base. What are you seeing the most?
Yeah, I mean, most of my existing clients, right, are sort of traditional energy clients who are focused on kind of the E side of the ESG buckets. And they've seen increased amounts of opportunities as the broader world, continues to focus on reducing their environmental footprint. But, I'm seeing an increased amount of new clients who are, non-traditional energy clients. These are usually large companies that are endeavoring to accomplish many of their environmental goals in-house and are both, very loud and very proud about those efforts to decarbonize and otherwise reduce their footprint. So the net result is a shift really in my overall client base, going from sort of largely traditional energy companies alone to a much broader mix of, the footprint of U.S. companies that are now broadly based and broadly focused on sustainability.
I'm sorry if you hear that background noise. I think there's a motorcycle on the street right outside, so we'll hopeful that's not too loud.
I'm not hearing it through the Zoom, so I think we're okay.
Terrific. That's good news. So tell me more about how Davis Wright is positioning itself to guide and advise clients. And I want to reference a comment that you made. You served on a panel for the Legal ESG Summit last October, and something you said stuck with me. Because you said if we were to list all the lawyers who are serving ESG for our clients, we would list everybody in our firm on the website. And that, to me, is an incredibly poignant observation because it says that ESG really is embedded in all that lawyers are doing for their clients. I would love for you to elaborate on that as well.
Yeah, look, I mean, there are just so many lawyers in so many different disciplines who are already doing ESG work. They just don't call it ESG work. I mean, at the end of the day, ESG is kind of just a useful label, right? It helps us capture what companies, both what the companies are already doing and their efforts aimed at sort of societal impact and corporate responsibility. And it's also a useful moniker for regulators to sort of, and the public at large, to sort of hold these companies accountable to those efforts. Fundamentally, what all lawyers do is we help our companies, the companies that we advise, to make good decisions that will ensure profitability, but hopefully that those same decisions will be held out to be in the broader public interest. And so, what's hard, right, is linking those efforts together and helping lawyers who, for example, might be helping on, say, the G side of ESG be aware of how other lawyers are currently helping or maybe helping that same company with efforts on the E side and and so on. What we're doing at Davis Wright to position ourselves to best guide our clients in all things ESG is to build that internal infrastructure that's necessary to communicate among disciplines and otherwise busy lawyers, and really add almost what I'm kind of labeling as an ESG focused channel across client focused teams. Let me unpack that because I realize that's just like a bunch of jargon. Look, it's not good enough that you have a client team focused on one company. I think a lot of firms have set those up and are doing so successfully. Frankly, I think it's table stakes at this point. If you don't have a client team for some of your biggest companies, you're probably not really providing them the level of service that you ought to be. So most firms are already doing that. The addition of ESG is to make sure that you're also regularly communicating across the client team that already exists about ESG focused work and how one area might impact another area that you're providing service for, or that you're issue spotting for your client in the midst of doing one set of ESG work. That, hey, just so you're aware, there are likely other ESG related topics. And oh, by the way, Davis Wright Tremaine should be able to help you with that. I've got this great attorney in New York that can help you with your advertising needs as you're proclaiming all of your ESG efforts in that arena. I got another attorney in Seattle who's focused on setting up your foundation if that's what you're focused on. I've got another lawyer in LA who's working on setting up diversity policies as you try to ensure your ESG policies impacts your own teams internally. Those kind of conversations and making sure that guidance is there requires building a significant amount of infrastructure at the firm itself. And so that's how we're trying to position ourselves to be able to guide folks on all things ESG.
And I think that's such a crucial point, because even within our client organizations, so many of the elements of ESG are handled by completely different and separate departments. Within law firms, so many elements of ESG are handled by completely separate and different departments. So to get a holistic view from outside counsel into the client, I think would be incredibly valuable to the client organization, because sometimes even within the client, the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing.
And frankly, more often than not, that's the case with the bigger companies, and that's okay. And what it actually means, right, is that at these companies, ESG and sustainability are so ingrained in what they're trying to do that there is just pockets of that work happening all over those companies. And that's exactly what we want from a broader perspective, right? We want individual people just doing the right thing to try to, reduce their footprint and do right for the world. That's a good thing. But it does mean there are some inefficiencies associated with that, some additional costs associated with that. And that's a lot of what ESG efforts internally at companies are focused on, trying to actually coordinate the various efforts that are appropriately happening across companies. And that's a place that law firms are uniquely qualified to support, right? You have consultants who are coming in, much like yourself, to help coordinate those things, but law firms often help paper and ensure cost reductions on those kind of efforts in a way that we can really add value.
And I completely agree. And to your point earlier about having client teams, law firms with good client relationships are already touching every part of that client. And so they are already embedded, if you will, in these various elements of what's happening on ESG. So it just makes perfect sense for them to help coalesce and coordinate.
I think the best, Pam, I would just add that I think the best teams focused on ESG work today, and frankly, just broader client service at law firms today, have that exactly in mind. And so I think, any of our listeners take away one point, it's that, the best thing you can do for your client is to help coordinate the attorneys working for the client. And, as they continue to focus on ESG, this is another point of coordination.
Yep, absolutely. So I mentioned that I spent some time at Davis Wright. I still have friends there, and one little birdie friend told me that you are the new chair of DWT's Sustainability Committee. Is that something that you actually campaigned for, or were you handpicked for other reasons? And then tell me what you're going to be focusing on during your term.
Well, I don't know if there was I don't know if there was a true campaign involved, but it was definitely something I was interested in doing and excited to be a part of. In my mind, if we as a firm are going to be out there, marketing to clients our prowess in helping guide their ESG work, we needed to be able to say that we are walking the walk ourselves.
Yes.
And so that was part of the reason for creating the Sustainability Committee in the first place, was to say, look, we are already doing many of these things internally, just like most of the companies out there are. But it is useful. It is a useful label, and it is a useful practice and a corporate responsibility and accountability to have the coordination of those efforts come out of a committee, right? So that's why we have one, and why I was interested in becoming the chair, to help guide that as we move forward as a law firm.
And so, what will you focus on?
Yeah. So, we put together a sort of strategic plan and for our committee. I am. Anytime I say that, I roll my eyes a little bit, because anytime I hear strategic plan, it makes me think, okay, great, you're going to write something up and it's going to live on a shelf, and that's the end of it.
Yep.
But what it is useful for is sort of establishing goals, right? And that's really what that project helped us do. What we determined, and this is not rocket science, but it's helpful. We realized that law firms really have an impact, and our environmental impact is primarily what we're focused on, and our environmental impact as a law firm is really caused by three things, and this is what we're going to focus on during my term as a Sustainability Committee chair. We impact the environment through our office energy consumption, our business travel, and our employee commuting. So those three areas, and reducing the impact, the carbon impact associated with each of those, is where we're going to be focusing.
And so I'm gonna ask the question that I often get from my law firm clients whenever I broach the subject of business travel. But our clients need to see us. You're not going to stop me from going to see my client.
No, that would be business suicide. Look, we're not the sustainability, and frankly, those are the first words out of our mouth anytime we go talk to. We actually have been doing a little bit of a virtual roadshow, is how we've been framing it, where we've been dropping in on office committee meetings, just to talk a little bit about ways in which we can reduce both business travel and employee commuting. I mean, on the business travel side, we want our lawyers meeting with our clients. We 100% want that to happen. We only want to have that happen when the client wants it. Right. A number of clients are telling us, hey, we're happy to meet you over Zoom.
Yep.
No need to fly to come meet us, right? So we want our lawyers to ask, do you actually want to see us in person? That alone is going to significantly reduce the amount of business travel. The second aspect, and the most important aspect in my mind, is just to be a bit more intentional. When you are doing your business travel, are you thinking about combining trips into one, so that you're not flying to and from the same city in the same week multiple times? Right. Which, pre-COVID, people were doing.
Yes.
And so it's thinking through, like, hey, can I have 2 flights in a year to a certain city rather than 5, and reducing business travel in that way, and just doing by extending our trips, right? So it's things of that nature on the business travel side that will, really move the needle. But God, no one is saying stop travel. Far from it.
Right.
We're actually trying to push our people to go back to traveling, post COVID, because that's critical for our business.
And I think your comment about some of this travel we did without even thinking pre-COVID, I think in this one respect, at least, COVID did us a favor because it made us aware that we can still be quite successful and we can still serve our clients quite well without having to be on a plane every week. And I think that the challenge will be to not let the pendulum swing way back to what it was pre-COVID, but to find that balance.
I think that's exactly right. That's exactly right. I mean, it's a business imperative to be more intentional about business travel now. Every law firm, enjoyed significant cost reduction
Mhm.
during COVID because of the fact that there was essentially no business travel happening. And, there's no need or desire for any law firm to suddenly ramp to 100% of the business travel that existed pre-COVID. And so, given that, it also allows us to spend a little bit more time thinking about, okay, do I need to take the flight? If I am taking the flight, can I extend my stay to meet with a few clients on that same
Mhm.
trip?
Mhm.
And am I taking the most sustainable option? A lot of airlines have really bought into the ESG movement and are really focused on their own reductions. And so there are, frankly, some some airlines that are a bit cleaner than others, and you can find that if you look at alternativeairline.com, for example.
Yep.
It gives you that information. Doing a nonstop flight instead of a couple stop flight.
Mhm.
Those are all simple but effective ways to reduce the footprint associated with our business travel.
So I would imagine that many of Davis Wright's large clients are already putting forth supplier and vendor questionnaires to Davis Wright to fill out. What are you seeing with respect to client pressure, since we are, as law firms, part of our clients' scope 3? Are you seeing an increased interest from your clients on your ESG performance?
We are, and what's interesting, right, is most of these clients, I am someone who places, diversity related and pro bono related topics in a law firm's own ESG
Mhm.
efforts.
Yep.
And
Mhm.
so, I sort of firmly put those into the social bucket.
Yep.
And for years, well before the ESG movement was the thing,
Mhm.
um, clients were surveying their law firms about their pro bono efforts as well as their diversity efforts. And so that set of surveys is well established. I mean,
Yes.
we get, as a large law firm, AmLaw 100 firm, we get hundreds of these client surveys. What's been interesting is the number of surveys that we are starting to receive, not nearly in the same scope. I mean, we're talking an order of magnitude less, but that are starting to ask about carbon emissions
Mhm.
and asking for information about our own internal ESG efforts. And so that, look, that's always a great driver of law firm change. When the clients start for asking questions about these things, if they're asking, do you have, a sustainability committee or a committee focused on ESG? Guess what? All of a sudden, every law firm has a sustainability committee.
Yes, yes, yes. And when the clients start asking for what are your greenhouse gas emissions per location, then all of a sudden law firms are going to have
All
to.
of a sudden, guess
Yes.
what? Everybody starts counting them.
Yes, that's exactly right. I always say there's no greater voice than the voice of the client if you want to affect change at law firms. And they're certainly doing it with respect
That's
to
right.
ESG questionnaires. And so what do
Yeah, so it's starting to
okay.
increase, but look, I will say it's it's important that we think about what that means, and that clients also, sort of try to meet law firms where they are.
Yes.
The vast majority of law firms have done little to nothing in this space, or if they have, they've done it from a cost reduction focus more than anything. And so
Right.
getting law firms, my own included, to start to move towards seeing this as just a sort of societal imperative is one that is going to take a lot of effort and a lot of coaching, and will not happen overnight. And so, as our clients ask us for this, most of them, to their credit, are only holding us to the same standard that they're holding themselves. And so, as long as that sort of continues, I think everyone will move forward together at the right pace.
And I think that that's a huge opportunity for professional service firms to actually collaborate and make progress together with their clients. It's an incredible relationship builder when you have, meetings with clients twice a year just to talk about your progress on ESG. And, oh, I found this resource. Have you heard about that? And here's what you can do. Here's what we work, or here's what we did that worked. Here's what we did that didn't work. And it's just an incredible collaboration and one more relationship to develop with clients. So frankly, it's a good thing as we're all moving forward together.
Absolutely. And look, I mean, at the end of the day, while law firms are competitors, this is not an area where we have to compete with one another. This is an area where helping one another actually benefits the broader legal society. And, one of my roles outside of the energy arena is I serve as the president of the Bar Association of San Francisco. And in that role, one of the most important things is to convene law firms to support one another. Right now, it's been largely focused on how to support one another coming out of COVID with things like hybrid work. But you can easily see that these convenings of law firm leaders, which the Inside ESG Summit, for example, was a great example of. These are opportunities for law firms to help one another, benefit the world more broadly, and that's a pretty exciting thing.
I completely agree with you. My prior career was in marketing, and that is a much more competitive role. But in this role, in the firms that I've been working with, it is so collaborative and encouraging. And my mantra is we all win if we all win in this particular space. So, we'll all be in a better place if we all succeed at our ESG efforts, which is a wonderful place to be.
Absolutely.
So what is your prediction with respect to ESG in society? Obviously, in the US, there's quite a bit of pushback against ESG. Do you see this focus on ESG as a moment that's going to go away, or is it a movement? And will the political pushback subside or surge?
Yeah, I mean, I think the political pushback that's focused on ESG policies right now is driven largely by some of the same fear and I'm going to go as far as to call it ignorance that existed with a number of sort of societal movements that have been successful throughout U.S. history and throughout the world's history. And so, I think as folks realize that many of the same individuals who are pushing back on the label of ESG are actually individually committed to the components of ESG. And it's one of the most sort of amusing things right now for those of us who work in this arena is that, so much of it's just political posturing and has little to do with the policies and little to do with the actual impacts. And so, given that, I think the political pushback is largely just going to be noise. I think it's going to continue to exist because it is a useful label and a useful attack for those who are, focused on ESG policies, both positively and negatively. Both sides are using it from a political perspective. But substantively, I think my prediction is that ESG is here to stay. and will only move forward, whether it's under that label or not. The substantive work that has fallen under the ESG label is here to stay.
I completely agree with that. I use the phrase "the horse has left the barn," and
Yeah.
you're right. It might be under a different label, or we might talk about it differently. But the movement and the progress is going to continue to move forward.
For those who appreciate the label, it will continue to have its power. I often have been talking about the arc of ESG as being similar to the arc within law firms. The arc
Mhm.
of ESG has been similar to the arc of both the diversity, equity and inclusion movement,
Mhm. Mhm.
as well as the pro bono movement before that.
Yep.
Uh, and there is a power in labels for sure. And so for those who really appreciate the ESG label, I think they are holding on to it and will push it forward as they need. But for those who have real problems with the ESG label or have real difficulties understanding the ESG label, and I'll put myself in the ignorance category initially. I mean, when I first heard about ESG a number of years ago, I was sort of like, what the,
Mhm.
it took all that I could just to remember what the E, S, and G stood for,
Yes. Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And so to me, the label itself is kind of irrelevant. And so, I definitely think though that you will find, just like Black Lives Matter, came to define the diversity movement for a period of time, and it had its challenges because it came to define the diversity movement for a little chunk of time. Many folks who balked at that as part of being part of the label quickly were comfortable with the same diversity policies that ensued.
Yep.
And
Yep.
so I think you'll find similar things happening with ESG. Even folks who balk at the ESG label will be comfortable with reducing the carbon impact, which also, by the way, reduces costs,
Yes.
and are comfortable with the social policies that impact their teams and their individual team members, employees,
Mhm.
because that's good for retention, et cetera, et cetera.
Yep.
Like the
Yep.
transparency associated with governance results in just good decision making. Why, these are the kind of things that all companies and all law firms are finding to just be helpful. So, in substance, they will continue whether or not they happen under the ESG label.
Yes, yes. So we're almost out of time. I have two more questions. One is, it's clear that Davis Wright is quite far along in its ESG journey. What advice would you give to law firms who are just starting their ESG journey?
Yeah, I mean, it feels overwhelming, because the labels and the amount of stuff that can fall under it is just so broad. It's so broad. And so what I would advise and recommend is don't let that stop you from getting started. And just focus on your strengths. You're already doing ESG work as a firm today. There's no
Yes.
question in my mind. And so just taking a minute to decide, okay, here are our core strengths, here are our core competencies. This is the ESG work that we're already doing, is a useful effort, because someone that is one of your clients will come down the line and say, all right, tell us about your ESG efforts. And you don't want to be caught flat-footed. And so it's worth the time and effort to get started, even by just focusing on your strengths.
Yep, having that inventory already done by the time you first get questions from clients is going to be extremely helpful.
Definitely.
So if we chat again in 1 year, what will have changed? What are your predictions for how this is going to evolve in the next year?
I think within the next year, I think we're all just getting a bit more organized, right?
Mhm.
We're starting to get beyond the stage of just convening to talk about how we are moving these efforts forward, and getting more to the stage of convening to talk about the efforts that we've already done and how to
Yes.
get places
Mhm.
faster.
Mhm.
And so I think if we chat again in a year, what's going to be what largely will change, I think, is the level of coordination will actually reach a point where we actually are as firms coordinating with one another collectively to do things. I can imagine, for example, in a year that, when Earth Day, we're recording this just a little bit before Earth Day. You know, Earth Day will become a thing among law firms, and we'll have some coordinated Earth Day effort as law firms.
Mhm.
That feels very attainable and something that I'm sort of anticipating will happen, within the next year or two.
Well, I hope you're right, because I certainly would love to have you back in a year from now, and we'll do an update and we'll see and talk about the progress that the profession is making. Thank you so much for being a leader in this space, and thank you so much for agreeing to speak with me today.
Thank you, Pam.